Hello and welcome back to the channel. For today's tutorial, I'll be sharing with you how I made this deep illusion neckline corset with a basque waistline and also a turtle neckline and also a keyhole neckline at the back. So if it's your first time viewing my channel, please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and also leave your comment at the comment section. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you for always supporting my channel. So let's start. So I've marked out my vertical measurement, which is my shoulder to bust, my shoulder to under bust, my shoulder to waistline, and for my waistline I marked 4 inches for my basque. So going over to the neckline, I'm going to mark 3 inches at the neckline. So I'm going to make a mark there. So after making a mark, I'm going to go down by 2.5 inches for the depth of the neckline. Then I'll go ahead and place my French curve and I'll use it to connect the neckline. Next step is to place my tape and I'll mark my shoulder divided by 2. My shoulder divided by 2 is 7. Then I'm going to add 1/2 inch to it because I'm going to attach sleeve to the dress. So from there I'm going to be coming down by 1 inch, and at that 1 inch mark I'm going to connect it back to my shoulder, back to my neckline. Next is to determine my chest line, and to do that I'm going to mark my bust divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches, which is 7 inches. That is my chest line. So whatever I have at the shoulder, I'll make sure that is what I have exactly at this point. So after doing this, I'm just going to connect it straight. So the reason why I'm doing this is to make sure I have a straight line at that point. So I'll go and draw a straight line just like I said. After drawing the straight line, I'm going to outline my chest line with my ruler. Then I'll go ahead and outline it as CL, meaning my chest line. So after that, I'm just going to divide what I have here into 2. Measuring it, I have 7. Dividing it into 2 is 3.5 inches, and I will go in by 1/2. I'll place my French curve, touching the shoulder and down to my chest line. Then I'm going to draw my armhole curve. But before I do that, I'll make sure I have my bust circumference divided by 4 at that point to make sure it doesn't exceed my armhole area. So after marking my armhole curve, the next thing I'm going to mark is my dart intake. At my chest line, I'm going to mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2, and on the bust I'm still going to mark that nipple to nipple divided by 2, which is 3.5 inches, and I'll mark it at my under bust, at my waistline, and at the basque length. The next step I'll take is to place my ruler, and I'm going to connect all the marks that I've made on the pattern. Next is to mark my dart intake. At the under bust, I'm going to mark 1 inch at one side and 1 inch at the other side. Going down to my bust, I'm going to mark 1 inch at this side and also mark 1 inch at the other side. Going down to my basque, I'm going to mark 1 inch at this side, and I'm also going to mark 1 inch at the other side. Then I'll go ahead to use my ruler to connect a straight line. After drawing this, I'm going to place my French curve to mark the cupped area of my cupped corset. So I'm just going to take my French curve and I'm going to place it touching my bust and the 1 inch dart at my under bust. So if you don't have a French curve, you can also use a freehand sketch to do this. It's not compulsory to use a French curve. After drawing, I'll go ahead to use my marker to outline the pattern. After doing that, I'll move over to the other side of the cup of the corset, and I'll place my French curve touching my under bust down to the 1 inch dart intake I made at that point. I'll also go ahead to use my marker to outline it once I'm done marking out. From the mark from the chest line, I'm going to extend it down to my shoulder line. So to do that, I'm just going to divide my shoulder into 2. Then I'll go ahead to mark it at that point. So after that, I'll connect this line touching that mark that I have made. Next is to mark my dart intake at the upper part, but before I do that, I'm going to place my tape and measure 1.5 inches. So this 1.5 inches is not a constant. You can go ahead to mark 2 inches if you want your corset to be a little higher. So from that 1.5 inches mark, I'm just going to make a slight mark down to the bust area. So I changed my mind and I wanted the neckline to be a little deeper than what I wanted initially. So I'm just going to place my tape at the bust line and I'm going to come down by 1 inch. So you can go ahead and leave it at the bust line, but I'm going to go down by 1 inch after my bust line. Then I'm going to connect from that 1.5 inches mark down to that line at under my bust area. So I'm making a rough sketch to see if this is what I want actually. So after doing this, I'm just going to take my French curve and I'm going to draw out the pattern very well. So after drawing out the neckline, this is what I have. After drawing out that, I'm going to place my French curve touching my under bust and also touching that 1 inch mark I came down at my bust area, and I'm going to connect to draw my cup. So after drawing my cup, this is what I have at this part. Next step is to draw the cup for the other side of the corset. So to do that, I'm going to place my tape and I'll make sure I have exactly my bust circumference divided by 4, and I will mark. So what I have from my armhole to that point, that little point, I'm going to divide it into 2. So I have 1 inch and I'll go ahead to divide it into 2, giving me ½ inch. So next I'm going to place my French curve connecting from that ½ inch I came in down to the 1.5 inch at my cup area. So after I'm done marking, this is what my cup area looks like. Then I'll go ahead to place my French curve and I'm going to connect it from that point down to my under bust. So after drawing out, this is what I have, and next is to mark my dart intake. I'm going to place my tape at the center line and I'm going to mark 1 inch, just the way I did at the under bust and waistline, and I'll also place at the other side and I'll mark 1 inch. So from that 1 inch, I'm going to connect it down to my bust line. After outlining it with my pencil, I'll go ahead to use my marker to draw it out. I'll also go ahead to use my marker to outline the other parts of my pattern. So next step is to mark my body circumference. So at the bust, I'm going to insert my bust circumference divided by 4 and I'm going to mark. So I'll go ahead to measure this dart intake at this point and I'll replace it. So if you don't want to mark this, you can go ahead to mark the dart intake we have at the upper part. So I'm just going to mark it there and go ahead to mark my 1.5 sewing allowance. So this is not a constant. You can use 2 inches, 2.5 inches depending on what you want to use. Then I'll extend it to the bust. At the under bust, I'm going to mark my under bust circumference divided by 4, and after marking that, I'll go ahead to measure the dart intake I have at this point and I'm going to replace it. After replacing it, I'm going to mark my 1.5 inch sewing allowance. Then moving over to the waistline, I'm going to mark my waist circumference divided by 4 and I'm going to mark it there. So after marking it, I'm going to measure the dart intake and I'm going to mark it. After marking the dart intake, the next thing I'll do is to go ahead to mark my 1.5 inch sewing allowance. So at the basque length, I'm supposed to insert my hip circumference, but whatever I have is not up to my hip. I'll just mark to the end of the basque, because I'm still going to draw a basque waistline and I won't be needing that part also. The next thing I'll do is to place my ruler and I'm going to connect all the marks that I've made down to my basque length. Next step I'm going to take is to use my marker to outline all my patterns. And I will also go ahead to shade off the dark areas of my pattern that I won't be needing, so that you won't get confused. So after doing this, I'm going to fold the cup area to make sure what I have is matching. So if yours is not matching at this point, you can go ahead to blend it out. I'll also shade off this part also. So at this upper part, you can go ahead to extend your dart and then replace it with 1.5 inches or 2 inches at the armhole area if you want to tighten your yoke. So next thing I'm going to do is to cut out this pattern first. So after doing this, the next thing I'll do is to label my cup here as 1, the other part as 2, and at this lower part I'm going to label here as C, meaning center, and S, meaning side, and then I'll go over and write yoke at the upper part. So before I cut out my basque area, I'm just going to cut out my pattern. Please, at this point, if you find this tutorial very interesting and educative, please hit on the like button and don't forget to also subscribe if you haven't yet subscribed. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you for always supporting my channel. So I've gone ahead to cut out all my pattern and this is what I have. So as you can see, the pattern is very simple and easy. So if you also have any difficulty, let me know at the comment section. So next step, I'm going to put my pattern together and I'll make sure the waistline and the underbust line is together and I'm going to tape it. So right now I'm going to be drawing out the basque part of my corset. So before I draw the basque line, I'm going to go in by 1 inch so that the waistline at the back and at the front will outline when I'm joining it. So from there, I'm just going to place my ruler and I'm going to connect it downwards down to the basque area. So after this, I'll go ahead to cut out the basque side of this corset and I'm done with the front pattern, and we'll go ahead to draft the back pattern. So going over to the back pattern of this corset, I have gone ahead to mark my zipper and I marked the neckline I used was 3 inches by 1 inch, and all the measurements started from the zipper allowance. To mark my armhole, I'm going to place it, divide it by 2, go in by ½ inch, and I'm going to draw my armhole curve. So next thing is to draw my dart intake. To mark my dart intake, I'm going to place my tape starting from my zipper and I'm going to mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2. I'll go ahead and mark it at the chest line, at the bust line, at the under bust, and at the waist line. So after doing that, the next thing I'm going to do is to take my ruler and I'm going to draw a straight line. Next step is to measure from my shoulder to bust plus 1 inch. After making a mark at that point, I'm going to take my tape to the lower part and I'm going to mark ½ inch at both sides. So after marking ½ inch at both sides, I'm just going to connect it down to that shoulder to bust plus 1 inch mark that I made. Next is to insert my body circumference. At my bust, I'm going to mark my bust divided by 4 inches and I'm going to mark. So after marking that, I'll just add my sewing allowance at 1.5 because I don't have any darts on top. And then I'll extend it to the chest line. At the under bust, I'm going to mark my under bust circumference divided by 4. After marking that, I'm going to mark the little dart intake and I'll go ahead to mark my 1.5 sewing inch allowance. Going down to my waistline, I'm going to mark my waist circumference divided by 4 and I'll go ahead to measure this little dart intake I have at this point and I'm going to mark it, then mark my 1.5 inch sewing allowance. Next step is to take my ruler and I'll connect all the lines that I have marked. So at my back pattern, I'll just outline my chest line. So I'll be creating a yoke for the upper part, and that is where it's going to start from. Next thing, I'm going to take my tape and I'll place it at this point and I'll measure half inch. So I'm going to create a loop at this part of the back. So from there, I'm going to connect it down to my chest line at that point. So from there, I'm going to connect it just like I said, and this is what I have at the back. So I also outlined my armhole area, and I'll extend that chest line down to the zipper part and outline my waist area. So for you not to get confused, I'm just going to extend the line I have at the upper part, but I'll be cutting it out when I'm sewing. So to get rid of the bulginess at the back, I'm going to go down and mark half inch, and at that point I'm going to extend it down to my zipper line. So I'll go ahead to outline my pattern. After that, I'm done with this particular pattern and I'll go ahead to cut out my pattern. So after cutting up the upper part, we are going to cut the lower part, and first I'm going to get my skirt length. After marking my skirt length, I'm going to add 2 inches for folding allowance. So from the upper part of my pattern, I'm going to measure 7 inches. So if you're much taller, you are going to measure 8 inches for your hip. At the waistline, I'm going to measure the waist circumference and I'm going to be adding 1.5 inch sewing allowance. So going over to the hip point, I'm going to insert the hip circumference divided by 4 and I'm going to mark my sewing allowance. So whatever I have at the hip, I'm going to be minusing 2 inches and I will mark it at my skirt length and at my folding allowance. So next step is to connect all the lines that I have made. So my skirt pattern is ready with this. Then I'll go ahead to cut it out. After cutting it out, I placed it on another fabric and I added my zipper allowance. So after doing that, what I'm going to do next is to trace it out and my skirt pattern is ready. So with this, we have come to the end of the tutorial. So don't forget to like, share and subscribe.